All right, let's get right into it. We're going to break down how a single regional conflict managed to snowball into a full-on global crisis. We're talking paralyzed trade, a direct threat to the AI boom, and shockwaves that reached into our daily lives in some really unexpected ways. This quote from David Pan at Moody's, it just perfectly sets the stage. We tend to think of AI as this abstract thing, just code and data floating around in the cloud. But this pulls back the curtain. It shows us that the entire digital world is actually built on a foundation of very physical, very fragile supply chains. And in this story, one of the most critical ones just snapped. And this is the spot he was talking about, the Strait of Hormuz. It's only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, but and this is the crazy part, nearly a fifth of the entire world's oil and natural gas has to squeeze through this tiny waterway. It is absolutely one of the most vital arteries of the global economy. And then suddenly, it was effectively closed for business. So how did this all happen? How did a regional fight manage to put the whole world in a stranglehold? Well, it all went down incredibly fast. Okay, so check out this timeline. It all kicks off on February 28th. U.S. and Israeli forces strike Iran, and Iran's response is immediate. They declare the Strait of Hormuz closed. From there, things just spiral. By March 11th, attacks on ships are surging. By the 19th, oil prices are through the roof. We're talking $119 a barrel. There was this brief moment of hope for a ceasefire around the 23rd, but nope. Just 3 days later, Iran rejected the deal, and the world was officially locked into a long-term crisis. So what was the first big domino to fall? Well, global trade just stopped. The choke point was well and truly choked. And get a load of this number, 95%. That was the decline in daily ship traffic through the strait. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. One of the most essential trade routes on the planet went from being a busy highway to a ghost town, almost overnight. This visual really says it all, doesn't it? On the left, you've got normal traffic, an average of 96 ships a day. Tankers, cargo carriers, you name it. Then the conflict starts, and look at that. It just flatlines, down to an average of just 5 ships a day. That vital artery we talked about, it was completely clamped shut. So you might be wondering, why did all the ships stop sailing? Well, it wasn't just the physical danger. The financial risk just became astronomical. The cost to insure a ship for a single trip through there, they call it war risk insurance, jumped by more than 1,000%. It basically became financially impossible for most companies to even try. And this chart shows you exactly why that insurance was so high. Yeah? Okay. The majority of attacks, 57%, caused damage that was fixable. But look at that red slice. 5%. That's a 1 in 20 chance that your ship just gets sunk. Total loss. That's a gamble almost no one is willing to take. This wasn't some theoretical threat. Ships were actually being hit, and some of them weren't making it back. Okay, this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. We're about to connect this shipping crisis in the Persian Gulf to a huge reality check for the booming artificial intelligence industry. Sounds wild, I know, but stick with me. So you have this huge contrast. On one hand, there's the dream of AI, this world of code, data, and tokens that seems to live in the cloud. But then there's the reality. The cloud is just a bunch of giant physical buildings that need tons of power, and the chips that run everything need real-world materials like helium and sulfur. The digital world, it turns out, has a very physical Achilles heel. And this conflict severed 2 of those critical physical links. First, an attack in Qatar knocked out roughly 30% of the entire world's helium supply, a gas you absolutely need to make semiconductors. Second, the blockade at Hormuz choked off nearly 20% of global LNG shipments. And guess what powers all those massive AI data centers? Yep, that gas. 2 huge hits, right where it hurts the most. But to be fair, you can't pin everything on the supply shock. A report from BlackRock adds a really important layer here. They basically argued that yes, the supply issues were real, but the massive surge in chip prices was also fueled by an absolute explosion in demand. They even coined a term for it, chipflation. It was a perfect storm of supply disappearing right as demand went through the roof. So far, we've focused on the global economic fallout. But it's so important that we also take a moment to understand the devastating human toll this conflict had on the people living inside Iran. You have to remember, this crisis didn't happen in a vacuum. The Iranian economy was already in a tough spot, weakened by years of sanctions and instability. Living standards had already fallen quite a bit over the last decade, which meant millions of people had very little cushion to absorb a huge new shock like this. And the impact on the most vulnerable was immediate. The United Nations estimated that in their high-impact scenario, the conflict would push an additional 304,000 people into extreme poverty. We're talking about trying to survive on less than $3 a day. But the devastation was much broader than just that. The same analysis found that a staggering 4.1 million people were pushed below the upper middle income poverty line. This was a massive blow to the country's middle class, erasing years and years of economic progress for millions of families. And beyond the poverty numbers, the bigger picture is just grim. First, the direct human cost, over 1,900 people killed. Then the displacement, as many as 3.2 million people were forced to flee their homes. The entire national economy was projected to shrink by over 10%, which is like turning back the clock on human development by a year and a half, all in just a few weeks. Okay, for our last piece of the puzzle, let's follow the ripples, because these massive shocks didn't just stay in one region. They spread across the globe and led to some really strange and unexpected consequences in daily life thousands of miles away. Here's a perfect example. In India, the premiere of a huge $65 million blockbuster called Toxic was delayed. Why? Because the Gulf region is a massive market for Indian films, and with the conflict going on, the producers were afraid they'd lose that entire audience. Or how about this one? All the way over in southern Italy, wine growers suddenly found their profits shrinking. The global energy shock had driven up the cost of diesel for their tractors and fertilizer for their vines, making it more expensive to produce every single bottle of wine. And this one is really something. In Pakistan, a country that is absolutely obsessed with cricket, fans were told they couldn't go to the nation's biggest tournament. The government ordered everyone to stay home and watch on TV, all to conserve fuel. A massive cultural event, silenced by a crisis happening a world away. So what's the big takeaway from all this? The conflict in the Strait of Hormuz was really a brutal lesson in just how fragile our modern world is. It showed us that the systems we depend on, for energy, for technology, for trade, even for entertainment, are way more vulnerable than we ever imagined. And it leaves us with one fundamental question to think about. We just saw how a 21-mile stretch of water could impact AI development in Silicon Valley and empty out cricket stadiums in Pakistan. So, in a world that's this deeply intertwined, is it even possible for a crisis to be truly